Hey everybody, Travis here, and I'm back with another book review. This time we'll be reviewing Talking to Strangers by the Canadian author and journalist Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell also wrote the book Outliers, which is the first Malcolm Gladwell book that I have read. This is the second, and Outliers is about how successful people in their respective field or industry rose to prominence, and it was a combination of being at the right place at the right time and also having a really good work ethic. This book, Talking to Strangers, at first I thought it was a book about talking to strangers and what we can learn from that and how talking to strangers can improve your life. That's not really what this book ended up being about. This book is actually about human beings and our proclivity to default to truth. When we have to determine if someone is either innocent or if they're guilty, we will default to truth. We will believe that they're innocent more often than not. Because as a species, human beings, in order to cooperate and in order to keep the gears of society moving along, we need to just have an innate bias to truth. We need to believe that people are good actors. When you send your child off to school, you don't want to think that the teacher automatically is some criminal or some bad actor that's going to abuse your child. No, you default to truth. You default to trusting that, hey, I'm sending my child to school. I'm assuming that they're going to get a proper education because maybe you've read the reviews or things like that. But as a species, we're very trusting, and we need to see a smoking gun. We need to have so many red flags that the only conclusion is that the person is guilty or that they're deceitful or that they're untrustworthy. And to illustrate this point, Malcolm Gladwell talks about experiments. The first experiment that he talked about was a computer versus a courtroom judge in determining whether the defendant on trial was either innocent or guilty. The judge is in the courtroom in person. He's a human being. He's been in the field for a number of years. He can also see the defendant with his two eyes. And he can also read the person's voice tone. He can look at their body language. He can look at their facial expressions. And you would think that that would give him a better clue as to whether the person was either innocent or guilty. The computer, on the other hand, was going up against the judge. The computer only had the piece of paper or the rap sheet of the suspect or the defendant. And it turns out that the computer beat the judge and that the computer was better able to tell if a defendant was either guilty or innocent better than the judge, even though the judge was there in person. And judges think that it's better if they see the defendant's face and they can hear their voice because those can give you some clues as to whether people are telling the truth or if they're actually lying. Another concept that Malcolm Gladwell talked about in this book that was super interesting was that human beings, whether you're a civilian or whether you're in law enforcement and it's actually your job to interrogate people and to find out if they're telling the truth or if they're telling lies, human beings are terrible. Again, whether you're law enforcement or not, at identifying mismatched type of people. And when Malcolm Gladwell talked about mismatched people, he's talking about the mismatch between someone's actions versus their body language. And for instance, sometimes someone could be very upright, have very confident body language, be very still, but could be telling a fib or telling a lie. On the flip side, someone could be very nervous and fidgety and very hesitant, and also their voice could be stuttering or very unsure of themselves. But in actuality, they're telling the truth. And so that's a good example of mismatched behavior. And turns out, no matter who you are, no matter what profession you're in, human beings are not good at telling whether the person is lying or telling the truth based on mismatched behavior. But we're very good at telling if someone is lying, if they're hesitating or if they're nervous. And we're very good at telling if people are telling the truth if they're very confident in their body language and they're very sure with how they present their words. And these were super important concepts when Malcolm Gladwell goes into the real life examples that he uses to illustrate his point. And these real life examples were super, super interesting. He starts off the book talking about a woman in her late 20s. Her name was Sandra Bland. And it was a racial type of a case. And she was an African-American woman in her late 20s. And she was pulled over by something super minor. She didn't put her turn signal on when she was pulling over to the side of the street. and she was stopped by a police officer who happened to be a white man. And even though Sandra Bland was a proper, upstanding citizen, the miscommunication that happened, the signals that she was giving that the officer misinterpreted, led him to escort her out of her vehicle, put her in cuffs, take her to jail, and tragically and horrifically, she actually committed suicide 3 days later. So that was just such an upsetting story. And there were more upsetting stories. Malcolm Gladwell also talked about the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Neville Chamberlain, and how he trusted Adolf Hitler before the onset of World War II. He wanted to broker peace between Germany and the rest of Europe, and so he actually traveled to Germany and met in person with Adolf Hitler. And he actually got a good impression of Adolf Hitler and believed that Hitler was telling the truth. He went as far as to write up a contract on paper with a dotted line, and he handed it to Hitler, and he said, if you sign on the dotted line, you're agreeing that Germany will not invade Poland. And Hitler was like, okay, I have to sign here? Okay. He signed on the dotted line. Neville Chamberlain goes back to Britain. Everybody's celebrating because Neville Chamberlain has just fixed the issue. He has just solved for world peace. And it turns out less than a year later, Hitler invades Poland and World War II begins. Terrible situation, but really educational type of a story. Gladwell also goes into Bernie Madoff, and Bernie Madoff was in charge of the biggest Ponzi scheme in world history, and he was caught by a man named Harry Markopolos. And that was super interesting because it talked about all of these people, thousands, if not millions of people who trusted Bernie Madoff, and it turns out that he was a complete liar and a complete fraud. Another great story. The most interesting story for me in this whole book was the story of Ana Montes, the Cuban spy. And she was working in the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. That's the third wing of the intelligence agencies within the United States government. There's the DIA, there is the CIA, and then there's the NSA. And she was part of the DIA, and she was a Cuban spy who was working in cahoots with Fidel Castro in Cuba. And she worked for the DIA, for the United States government, for more than 10 years. And she actually rose through the ranks and became one of the highest members of the DIA. And it turns out that she was a complete fraud. She was a spy. And it took investigators years before they actually convicted her of her crimes, of being a foreign spy, because they defaulted to truth. They saw her confident body language, and they couldn't tell that she was actually a bad actor deceiving the entire United States government. Such a cool example. And a really cool part about that story, and in total, just talking about how the book is written, it's so interesting and it's so suspenseful how Malcolm Gladwell tees up all of these different real-life stories from history. It's 8 o'clock at night, and an intelligence officer is sitting in a dimly lit courtroom. Across the table is another intelligence officer who's been a part of the force for 15 years, and she's one of the highest performing members of the agency. But little does he know that she's actually a Cuban spy working against the US government for the past decade. And that's how he tees up some of these stories, and it's really cool and it's really gripping how it captures your attention. So overall, in terms of a book review score, I give this book a 7.9. And because it's a 7.9, I just have a gripe with the title, Talking to Strangers. In some cases, we don't even truly know people that we think we know after interacting with them for years and years and years. I might be working with a coworker for 5 years, not really getting to know them deeply as a person, but working with them for so long, I might think that I know them as a person when actually I don't. And so it was a little misleading in terms of the title. Other than that, really good book. Highly recommend it, and you'll learn a lot from it, and it talks about all of these different cases throughout history. And so because of that, it was very educational, and I learned a lot. I gained a lot of insight from this book, and I recommend that you read it too. I'll definitely be checking out more of Malcolm Gladwell's books. I also read Outliers. That's a really good book too. Anyways, thanks so much everybody for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. It means a lot to me. And also you can follow me on Travis D'Souza Quotes on Instagram, where I post really cool quotes really related to wisdom, and also on my X account, Travis D'Souza. Take care, everybody. Catch you in the next book review. All the best. Bye.